If you don't have a message, you don't have a talk, you don't have a presentation.
What if I told you that the biggest shift in public speaking isn't about perfect slides, polished gestures, or even having the right suit? It's about something much simpler and much more powerful. After 42 years in the corporate world, I've watched presentation culture transform from overhead projectors and clunky PowerPoints to TED Talks and authentic storytelling. In this video, I want to show you what really matters when you step in front of an audience and why most people are still getting it wrong. Let's dive in.
I was at an event last night with some of my peers. I'm a member of a lot of different founders networks as a founder of a business. And one of the things that we all had to do at this dinner was each of us had to stand up in front of the room and do a 2 to 3 minute talk just about who we are and how we got to doing the thing that it is that we each do. And as I was preparing, waiting for my turn, I was probably, I don't know, 8th or ninth in a room of 30 people. I was thinking about my own career, and I realized I've been working in the corporate world for 42 years. And that just shocked me. I was like, wow, that's a long time. It's probably more than most of these people have been alive. But having had a career as long as that, I remember times when things were different than what most people remember, because I grew up and came into my early career days, in the late 80s and early 90s. And at that point in time, there were very different ways of showing up. And public speaking, the thing I do now, was a completely different thing. I mean, first of all, it was something that only professionals did. But if you had to be a public speaker, you followed certain rules. But those rules, of course, carried over into our presentations in the boardroom. And some of those rules were things like, well, you had to have a PowerPoint deck. Like that was absolutely essential. And I mean, let me just put that into context because I actually remember when PowerPoint didn't exist. And we actually would use, boards, and we would have boards written. And when PowerPoint came out, it was like, oh my goodness, I don't need to go to the studio and have those literal boards created for me. I can do it on a computer. The other thing we would use actually, as I would think about it, wasn't just boards. We would also use, this will really date me, is the acetates, the overheads. And so you would draw on an overhead and you would put it on a transparent light, and it would reflect it up on the wall. And so everybody was in the dark. Literally, they were in the dark because that was the only way they could see the thing that you were presenting. So things like PowerPoint came along, and it was such an incredible revolution. And suddenly it was, let's use PowerPoint for everything because it seemed to be entertaining. And suddenly public speaking became less about the person and more about the presentation that they were giving, that thing that was entertaining them off to the side. And, things like the transitions, you knew somebody was good at PowerPoint because they knew how to use transitions or sound effects. That was, I remember actually when sound effects came out, and it was like, not only did you have a transition, but you had a transition with a sound effect that showed you really knew your stuff. But here was the thing, any presentation is not about the actual presentation that you've got on a PowerPoint deck or on whatever software you're using these days. It's about the message that you're giving. And I think the thing that I can see in my career that has had the biggest shift is that we as presenters, as public speakers, for so long, we're focused on the presentation style. How do I stand? What do I do with my hands? How do I get over my nerves? And we were forgetting that the most important thing was the message. That's way more important than how your presentation deck looks, than whether your body is in the right position. Because if you don't have a message, you don't have a talk, you don't have a presentation. And yet we would spend hours building these decks that had messages built within them, but we probably wouldn't rehearse them because we were really focused on getting everything on the screen right. And things like rehearsals were rare because we were rushing. to try and get these things done. And when I think about stage presentations, it was much more standing in front of a podium with an entire set of notes that you would, be using as you're giving your PowerPoint presentation behind you. And so your body language could be hidden. And you didn't have to worry about really engaging with the audience a whole lot. In fact, the audience didn't really expect a lot of engagement. What they were doing was reading along with you. And today, and I think this is one of the things that we have, TED to thank for and other storytelling mediums like, The Moth and there's a few others that really influenced the way public speakers show up today. Because what we saw was that if you've got a good message and you're able to build story into it, you don't need visual aids. You don't need, even your body language can be a little bit off because if you're able to connect with the message, it's amazing what your body will do. And so, when I think back to those days, story wasn't even something we ever talked about. In fact, it was probably the opposite. It wasn't about building a story into your talk or your presentation. It was, we might say things like, oh, build a story with the results. Tell us the story of what happened, but it was a case study and, it was problem solution outcome, which is a pretty boring actually story. What was way more interesting is how did you get there? What were the things you did? How did people feel? What worked? What didn't? You can build so much more into it. So when I look at public speaking today versus what we did, in the 90s and even the early 2000s, it was a very, very different thing. And I'm glad that those days are really beginning to go away. I mean, you still see speakers who have that same style. And in fact, when we look in the corporate world, it still is rampant. We see a lot of people still using those same techniques, making sure they've got their deck, using those case studies, and making sure that they've got the facts down and they've supported them. But that's actually not what resonates with us anymore. What we want is a genuine, authentic human in front of us who is ready to show up fully in what they know and what they don't know. Because the authenticity and the transparency are what help us to connect with them, to build trust with them, and to be able to understand their information in a way that we can action. And so let go of some of the need to be perfect or right. Let go of the need for the presentation deck that has all your words on the screen. Let go of showing up with your button down suit and your perfect everything because you think that the audience will respect you. What the audience wants most is to hear your knowledge, to hear your true understanding of it, but to also experience you genuinely in who you are. And that's, some of the biggest differences that I see in the world of public speaking today. It is a very different world than when I started out, over 40 years ago in the corporate world. I hope this has been helpful. And, we work with public speakers every day. And what we do is we really help them step into their thought leadership. And we do that through helping them to genuinely tell their stories, but bring their ideas into those stories so we as their audience understand them. And if that sounds like something that might be helpful for you, make sure to click the link below and book a meeting with me. I'd love to have a conversation about what you're doing and how we might be able to help you do it just a little better.